In Philadelphia, then the seat of the national government, a bill lies on the president's desk. It would make certain words a federal crime, words printed or spoken against Congress or against the president himself, and it carries an unusual clause. The law is written to expire on a fixed date, 2.5 years from now. Why draft a statute already scheduled to die? Welcome to Same Day, Different Century. I'm Zach. Today is July 14th. The date is July 14th, 1798. The United States is not quite at war and not quite at peace. For several years, and with increasing intensity since 1797, French warships and privateers had been seizing American merchant vessels on the open sea, several hundred of them, in response to the Jay Treaty with Britain, which France saw as a betrayal of their alliance. That spring, Congress created a Navy Department. By that summer, American captains were authorized to fight back. Yet the two republics never issue a formal declaration. Historians call the undeclared conflict that follows the quasi-war, fought by frigates and diplomats, not armies. The rupture had come the year before. President John Adams sent 3 envoys to Paris to settle the quarrel. There, intermediaries of the French foreign minister, Talleyrand, demanded a bribe and a loan to France before negotiations could even begin. The Americans refused. When Adams laid the dispatches before Congress in the spring of 1798, with the French go-betweens identified only as X, Y, and Z, the insult set off a national uproar. One envoy, John Marshall, sailed home to a hero's welcome. At a banquet in his honor, Congressman Robert Goodloe Harper is widely credited with raising the toast that became the war cry of the season. Millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute. Contrary to the legend, the line was never hurled in the face of the French. It was spoken at a celebration back home. That anger reshaped the politics of the moment. Adams led the Federalists, who wanted a strong central government, close commercial ties to Britain, and order at home. Against them stood the Democratic Republicans of Vice President Thomas Jefferson, who admired the French Revolution and suspected the Federalists of monarchist designs. The Republican newspapers were unrelenting. Their editors called Adams vain, corrupt, and a servant of British interests. To many Federalists, that press was not fair opposition. With French shots flying at American ships, it looked closer to collaboration. The fear driving them was not wholly manufactured. Revolutionary France had overturned governments across Europe, and it had loud admirers on American soil. So the Federalist Congress moved against both the foreigner and the critic. By mid-July, Adams had already signed 3 laws. One stretched the wait for citizenship from 5 years to 14, aimed at immigrants who leaned Republican. A second let the president deport any non-citizen he considered dangerous. A third permitted the detention and removal of enemy nationals in a declared war, or in the event of an invasion or predatory incursion by a foreign power. Recent arrivals from Ireland and France, many of them Republican voters, were among the main groups Federalists feared. The fourth, waiting on his desk, reached to the citizens' printing press. What the fourth law actually said would determine how far the federal government could go in punishing political criticism. The Sedition Act became law on July 14, 1798. Its formal title was Bland, an act in addition to an earlier law for the punishment of certain crimes against the United States. Its substance was anything but bland. It made it a federal offense to write, print, or publish any false, scandalous, and malicious statement against the government, the Congress, or the president, with intent to defame them or rouse public contempt. The punishment was fines and prison. One office was missing from the protected list. The law shielded the president and both houses of Congress. It said nothing about the vice president, and the vice president was Jefferson, the Federalist chief rival. Observers caught it immediately. A law against defaming the government somehow left the government's leading opponent exposed. Then there was the clause carried on the president's desk. The act was set to expire on March 3, 1801. One day before Jefferson's inauguration would end the Federalist control of the presidency. Should the Republicans win the upcoming election, the weapon would disappear before they could turn it against Federalists. Republicans did not miss the arithmetic. Adams himself did not write these laws. They came from his party's majority in Congress, and he signed them. He never once used the companion power to deport a friendly alien, though he could have. But his signature made the Sedition Act real, and his administration would enforce it. Yet the Federalists did not believe they were shredding the First Amendment, and by the legal thinking of their day, they had a case. The First Amendment was barely 7 years old. What its words actually forbade had never been tested, and this law shoved the question into the open. The prevailing view held that press freedom barred the government from censoring material before publication, not from punishing it afterward. On that reading, a law that let printers print, then prosecuted them for falsehoods, left the Constitution intact. Unlike English law, the Act allowed defendants to prove that their statements were true. Even so, opponents in Congress warned that it bent the courts toward the will of the president. In practice, the law fell on one side. Nearly every target was a Republican, and prosecutors pursued Republican editors up and down the coast. Benjamin Franklin Bach, grandson of the late Benjamin Franklin, and editor of Philadelphia's most aggressive Republican paper, was already under arrest on common law sedition charges before the statute even took effect. He died of yellow fever that September, before he could be brought to trial. Others faced the courts. Traditional accounts count 14 people indicted and 10 convicted. The question now was whether the rest of the country would respond the same way. The sharpest answer came from 2 state legislatures. Working in secret, Jefferson drafted resolutions adopted by Kentucky, and Madison drafted a companion set for Virginia. Both declared the Alien and Sedition Acts unconstitutional. Both argued that the states themselves could judge when the federal government had overstepped, a theory of state power that would be invoked and fiercely contested for decades to come. Kentucky returned the following year with language sharper still, claiming a state's right to nullify a federal law it judged void. However, in 1798, it stood nearly alone. Other states rejected it, insisting that ruling on a law's constitutionality belonged to the courts, not to legislatures. By then, the emergency that justified it all was cooling. In the autumn of 1800, American and French negotiators signed a settlement that quietly ended the naval war. The danger that had powered the acts was receding. The acts became a defining grievance of the election of 1800. Jefferson made them a central grievance of a campaign he ultimately won, though the acts were one cause among several. Once in office, he pardoned those convicted under the Sedition Act. The law itself expired on schedule in March 1801. The naturalization change was repealed, and the power to deport friendly aliens lapsed. One of the 4 laws outlived the others, the Alien Enemies Act. The Wartime Deportation Authority stayed on the books. It was invoked during the War of 1812, in both World Wars, and has remained at the center of fierce modern debates over executive power and immigration. A statute drafted in the summer of 1798 is still living law. The Sedition Act itself was never tested before the Supreme Court. It died before any case could climb that far. Its verdict arrived later. When the court built modern free speech protection in 1964 in New York Times v. Sullivan, it reached back to the Sedition Act and concluded that the attack on the law had carried the day in the court of history. The principle that a citizen may criticize those in power sharply, even unfairly, even wrongly, without risking prison, draws part of its strength from a law that tried the reverse and lost. Every modern argument over what a citizen may say about those in power runs back in part through this July day, the first time the federal government tried to answer that question by making certain words a crime. That same day, different century. I'm Zach. We'll be back tomorrow with another date, another story. Thanks for listening. Hey guys, it's Zach. Real quick before you go, I just wanted to say thank you so much for listening. It really means a lot. If you enjoyed the show, all I ask is that you share it with someone that you think would enjoy it too. That's the best way to help us out. I'll see you tomorrow.